Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Zero to Traction, a podcast about how first-time founders create startups that scale. I'm one of your co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and I'm here with my other co-host and my friend, Cameron Law. Cameron, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here and looking forward to launching this with you, JDM.
Yeah, we got a brand new venture for us, right?
Yeah,
This is exciting.
I
This
think
is new. This is different. This is
this might
fun.
be our number 2 one, but hey, we're excited to launch it. So
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. But it's gonna be nice fun. And so we got a good show today that we created. So we have a 3 topics. We're gonna first talk about who we are and what the heck we're doing here, what this podcast is all about, because it is our first episode, so we got to figure that out. Topic 2, some startup misnomers, traction fallacies, the things that the world just seems to get wrong about those concepts, and why we're gonna come and save the day, and so forth. And then topic 3, to talk about some tools and terminology and how that kind of all connects together inside of this. So it's going to be fun. So, Cameron, why don't you get us started with our first segment?
perfect. Well, let's hop on into who we are and why we're ultimately here and launching this podcast for all of you. We're hoping you're those first-time founders and looking forward to building those scalable startups. But my name's Cameron Law. I don't have a cool, fancy, short JDM. It'd be CRL, which is a little less cool than JDM or JDooms. But I have the pleasure of working up with startups and entrepreneurs. And I'm excited to launch this podcast with a fellow startup champion, JDM. And a little bit about me. I currently serve as the executive director of a Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship called the Carlson Center. And we work with students and community members in launching their businesses from idea to seed stage. And outside of that, I get to work with a number of startups through organizing 1 million cups, which I think I've been on the team for 6 years with a little brief hiccup there every now and then. But and that's just really great community organizing and serving founders, but also building startup weekends and startup challenges, which is our other venture that was referred to earlier that JDM and I and Laura Good have launched here through the Carlson Center. And just get to serve startups in a variety of ways and help them navigate the journey. Part of my passion is really understanding the ecosystem around supporting entrepreneurs and giving them the tools and resources and connections to succeed. And so my personal why of really us launching this podcast together was I've always wanted to be leading a podcast. I've been on many of them as guests, but I felt like it was my time to shine, I guess, and bringing this to fruition. And I'm excited to partner with JDM and launching this. So I'll turn it back to you, JDM, on sharing a little bit more about who you are and what brought you to starting this podcast with me.
Well, I am excited to be doing this podcast with you. Like I said in the intro, Josh David Miller, Josh JDM, J Doom, as you mentioned, people call me sometimes. Fortunately or unfortunately, we'll just kind of leave that up to historians to decide. But not my first rodeo. This is I don't know, I think my third podcast or so. Of course, I've been a guest on a number of them. I'm a content creator, so content creator is going to create, that's kind of why I'm here. I'm a really big fan of podcasts. I love the medium. I love the honor, like, frankly, that we get from somebody like letting us like drop into their ear, keep them company on their commute or at the gym or while they're doing the dishes, whatever it is, but to spend that kind of intimate time together with people. And it's not for 60 seconds, it's not like a TikTok or a reel or even a YouTube video. You can spend a half an hour with somebody in that format. So I just love podcasts, and I'm really grateful when we get people listening to that. And for me, I work with early stage startups, just like you do. My specialty is in traction and in helping startups between the seed and Series A kinds of stage. So when they start thinking like, oh, there's something there, we've got some customers, we've got some revenue, maybe we've got some investment at this particular point, and it's like, how do we get this to to a place where it's going to all be predictable and all be repeatable, with like this really robust traction evidence. And so that's kind of the angle that I'm coming at this. And so yeah, I'm really excited to kind of put that into a new medium here. And I know I just dropped some terminologies that might not be familiar to all of you out there, and if it's not, I'm sure we'll kind of get to them in a minute.
Well, awesome. Well, let's hop into, well, why do we come up with this topic of zero to traction, and what's that all about? And so, as entrepreneurs and looking at kind of the marketplace and understanding the people that we are serving, we really looked at some of the things like traction and the misunderstanding that's around that. And a lot of times that misunderstanding can take an entrepreneur way down the wrong path as they're following maybe evidence that's, not helping them along that journey. And then also we know we teach many of the tools and provide, frameworks for entrepreneurs and getting started. But a lot of times when it's, where do you get started? Go check out this book or check out this tool. And often is very generic and not always helpful in terms of like, how do I actually apply this on a regular basis to test, say, your assumptions and actually get your startup going in the right direction and starting to explore those unknowns. And so that's really where we wanted to come in and give you that honest conversation in that place for you to kind of hear how you can apply those tools and ultimately kind of look at it through a different lens. Anything you want to add there, JDM, on kind of like why did we focus on one, serving these kind of like first time founders that are looking to start their business and go from zero to traction, and anything else there?
Yeah, I mean, you said it really well. For me, there's like a pet peeve that's kind of buried into the why, which is that there's so much crap out there when it comes to startups. There's just so much like utter crap. And so like you either get, like you said, information that's really generic. So it's well, here's what a startup is. You're going to fill out a business model canvas, and then you're going to do a value prop canvas, and then we're going to have demo day, and everything's going to be great, yay! And it's ridiculous. It's not how that doesn't help anybody get from A to B. So the information can be really generic, and then you get the other end of that extreme, which is a much bigger pet peeve for me, which is where somebody will say like, oh, well, these are the 5 steps to launching your startup. Every startup follows it. No, they don't. Startups are different. And so then you end up with this like formula approach as if you're launching a Subway franchise. And that's just ridiculous. And startups are inherently unknown and risky and just crazy different and weird and fun. And so if we get this like opportunity to like engage in that space, you can't attack it generically, and you can't attack it with specificity. But what we can do is teach people how to think in startups, how to think like a successful startup founder, how to create that company that scales, even if it's your first time. And it's not just about memorizing tools. It's about thinking like, how do I think in the space? Like, what is the right thing to be thinking right now? It's that metacognition. And then then what tool do I use? Then I can go pick one off the shelf, right?
No, I love that, especially that last point. Like, they're tools that you would use to ultimately build the startup, right? It's not the building itself, right? It was like you'll learn about some tools later, such as the business model canvas and things like that, which we think are great tools, but building that is not your business, right? And so you're not in business until you're getting the customers and seeing that traction as you get there, right? And so we really want to empower you to be able to take these tools and apply it and actually do the hard work of building it and making progress on your startup. And so, as we kind of look at this podcast, what to expect, right? What are they going to get from us, JDM? Well, I know one, they're going to get great energy and a good balance. We got the shredder of business models, and I don't have as cool of a name, but maybe the picker up
that's
of
me for the record,
and putting it together. But as we look at this podcast, I think a couple of the things that you're going to be able to walk away is some of those specific tools and techniques of how to do these things, right? We're going to be throwing out things like, how to test your assumptions, right? We're going to give you tools, but we're also going to share stories in an anthropological way, which really is bringing people in to share a best case scenario of how they've done that. And we're going to dissect those stories to say, this is how they used that tool that we talked about and how that led to this evidence being known or this breakthrough that allowed them to double down on certain things in relation to their business model. You're going to have it conversation style, just as we're having here. We love to have fun, and it's going to be great. And one of the things, as I shared with kind of the stories element of it, we're going to be bringing in guests. We're going to be bringing in entrepreneurs, subject matter experts, and people all around startups and entrepreneurship. So we're excited. That's kind of what to expect here from the Zero to Traction podcast.
Well, awesome. So I think it's a great segue into this concept of startups and traction. We keep using the term startups, and we're startups and founders and so forth. So let's talk about what we mean by those, because I think that can be the first thing I think that people get hung up on when it comes to startups. So if we start with like what actually is a startup, and that seems like it should be a fairly straightforward thing to describe, but if you spend any time in ecosystem development like Cameron and I do, then you quickly learn that everybody has a different definition. For some people, it's just SaaS. It's just software as a service. That's it. It's a web app or a mobile app, and boom, those are startups, and that's it. And then for other people, it also includes small businesses. For others, it includes CPG or consumer packaged goods, and for other people, it includes medical devices. And so it's like, so what do we mean when we talk about startup? I think for me, for the purposes of this podcast and for my professional work, it's the Steve Blank definition, which I really like, which is that a startup is an organization in search of a business model. I think it kind of captures the essence of it here. It's this uncertainty thing. It's that, okay, there's an idea there. We think about what might work here. We're going to have a customer, and we're going to offer them this value, and then we're going to capture some value in return, and we're going to deliver it to them a certain way, whether that's a device or a packaged good or a mobile app or whatever. We're going to deliver it to them in a certain way and get money from it, right? It's that whole business model, but we don't know what it is yet because we're doing something new. We're doing something different. We're doing something innovative. And so we have to find through, with the customer, what the right business model is. And then once you figure out that formula, right, for what works, then you're no longer a startup. That's how I think about startups. What about you, Cameron?
I think the only other element I'd bring in there is those the unknown of that business model, right? It's not just like starting with, oh, I can take this off the shelf and start to apply it to maybe a little bit different customer segment or those types of things, right? It's really exploring the unknowns that are associated with it, right? And that's where that kind of in search of a new business model that's not already out there, right? And so it's riddled with that. And a part of that is also just all the risk that comes with it, right? So it's in starting something that there's like no real known model of how to take this thing that you have in your head and actually bring it to fruition. It's riddled with those risks, and that's ultimately one of the misnomers, right? Is it's not just something you can take off the shelf and apply. It's I need to find all of the elements of where am I reaching these people to, who am I actually targeting, what language attracts them, and how do I monetize it, right? All of those good things that go into that startup and the entirety of its business model.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'd add like another fallacy about startups is that they're all scalable. And that's because when we think startups, we think, huge companies, we think the Facebooks of the world, where, you create something and suddenly you have, a billion users or whatever, but that they can scale to those really big numbers. And they do get a lot of the attention, but not every startup is scalable, and not every scalable business is a startup, because they don't all have that uncertainty, right, that you mentioned, that has to be de-risked out of the process. But all startups have that riskiness. But the scalability component is where a lot of the energy for startups go into, because that's where we talk about investment, right? An investor, a traditional equity-based investor, is only going to invest in a startup that can scale really large. Because of all that uncertainty, it's risky. And so they're putting money in there that they could just lose. So they have to get really big, outsized rewards. They're not looking for a stock market, 15% return on something. They're looking for, 10x or 100x returns on the investments that they're putting in. And so they need that big scalable component, into it. They need that thing to make them get really excited and really interested, like willing to write those early stage checks.
Totally. Yeah. And I think when you think of I like the way you'd put it, right? Was like, not all startups are scalable, and not all scalable businesses are startups, right? And I just hone in on that uncertainty component of it, and that, say you wanted to create the next franchise, right? Like that's a scalable business, but not a startup, because the model exists that you're going to be scaling, whether that's in a different geography or something of that sort. But really, that uncertainty a lot of times starts with like your who are you targeting, and the way you're reaching those people with whatever the thing you're trying to potentially create. We'll talk all about the misnomers of, you don't have to, it's not build it and they will come anymore, right? It's, you need to identify who you're targeting, what those issues are, and then ultimately how you could build a solution to solve those particular needs, right? But that's where the uncertainty is like, is this problem big enough, right? So it's like, oh, I saw that JDM had this problem. Well, is that only JDM and 5 friends, or is that the millions of JDMs across the globe? And are they willing to pay you for it, right? And that's really where that marketplace and investment comes in, is can your $1 invested actually make an impact in that overall potentially global market, right? That they're trying to see that business scale to.
Right. And the interesting thing about, you mentioned the franchise thing and the restaurant thing, and it's because it's right. You said it's really well known. We know how restaurants work. You have fixed costs, you have variable costs, right? You have human resources, you have food that you have to get, and you charge for the food. You charge for their time in the restaurant, right? So it's pretty well understood. But when the pandemic hit, and that threw just like this massive wrench into all of these restaurants, such that a lot of restaurants then made the choice to become startups, to become organizations in search of a new business model because the old one wasn't working. And this is where you had some restaurants getting pretty innovative and saying like, well, let's actually start selling ingredients, because we have their supply chain problems that have led to grocery store shortages, because everybody's buying from the grocery store and nobody's buying from the restaurants. But the restaurant supply chain and the grocery store supply chains are different. So we have stuff that we can sell now. And so then they become this organization and searching for a business model. Like, can we sell this stuff? And so it's like, we think these old, stodgy, well understood industries are kind of immune from this, and they're not, right? And that's kind of the interesting part, is that that a startup can look really different. It can already be an existing business. Maybe it's already doing well, but that thing that makes a startup is that uncertainty. And with that uncertainty comes with that risk, that
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think
big risk.
the classic, I think one for me is the good old blockbuster Netflix, right? It was like, at the end of the day, you're just you were getting rentals of movies to someone, but Netflix and launching, their whole business was completely unknown. Would people actually be willing to like have a movie delivered to them or watch it online? I still remember with my fiance, I had like 300 DVDs. And I still remember the day she's like, well, haven't you heard of this thing, Netflix? I was like, no, I'll never do Netflix. I love the hard DVDs. Well, let alone I'm now subscribed to Netflix, Hulu, Apple, all of it, right? But it was that shift of, I wasn't that early adopter customer, right? Because I was already vested in the current, times. But as they found that value proposition for some of those earlier adopters, and now they've gotten into these people that obviously are mass scale at this stage. But for me is a good example, is kind of the blockbuster Netflix story of like, oh, the market was huge, but there was the uncertainty that was associated with it as they launched.
Yeah, I think that like this concept of uncertainty is really interesting. It can kind of guide a couple of other fallacies and misnomers that we have. And so I think this is the best order to take them. We'll talk about investment first. So a lot of people seem to think, and I don't know if this is like a Shark Tank problem, and I don't think you want to get me started on a Shark Tank rant today, maybe on a future episode, but I don't know if it's because of Shark Tank or just the way people tend to think about things in ego. But people seem to think that investors invest in ideas, that they hear, oh, that's a really good idea, I want to put my money in that idea. And that's not true. And you get people who then say, well, okay, yeah, but they're investing in the team too. It's like, well, yes, they're investing in the team, and to a degree they're investing in the idea, but they're not investing really in any of those things directly because of how risky startups are. They're not willing to just throw their money into an idea. I like to say there's no such thing as a good idea. And that's definitely a subject for a future episode. But startups are looking for what Alex Blumberg, who is the founder of Gimlet Media, called a credible theory of hugeness. And so, like, you can say, "Oh, I got this, idea and this thing, and and I think it's going to be world changing," right? So you're like, "Okay, well, it could be scalable." That's the hugeness part, credible theory of hugeness, right? That's the hugeness part. It could get really big. That's interesting. But then there's the middle word there, that theory word, right? Which is to say, like, okay, maybe. And there's a big maybe here, right? But maybe this could get really big, but you're not big now. So how are you going to get from where you are now to really big? Because I, as an investor, am not getting my money unless you can actually get there. So how are you going to do it? And so a startup pitch is, right, articulating that theory of how they're going to get huge. So that's the theory of hugeness, but it has to be credible, right? And this is where that you have to get evidence coming in, where that shows, like, yes, you're the right team, and the timing is right, the traction is there, and there's a bunch of T's that we can go through. But you have to have all of this evidence that you're on the right track for this thing, and that you're the right team to execute on that. And that's what an investor is investing in. And so when we talk about the work of a startup, too often people are chasing those investment dollars from day one. So they're trying to say, okay, I want to figure out, I need to get money to do this. I need to figure out how I'm going to go and make this into a thing. I don't have a thing now. I need money to do that. How am I going to go get money? And so they try to chase down that path, which just leads to failure, because they're not going to invest in you unless you have that evidence. And the evidence isn't found on the path to the investor. The evidence is found on the path to the customer. And that's the concept that we call traction, right? Because traction is probably one of the more misunderstood concepts when it comes to startups. I don't know if you found that to be true?
Yeah, and I just wanted to make a quick point to kind of the like investment process. I definitely see that as like the main source of challenge, right? Like someone comes in with an idea and they're like, I need access to capital, right? Like that's always number one, like misnomer there. And I think part of it when they do that is you've set the business actually to sell the idea of the business versus is there an actual need that you're trying to solve with the customer, right? Like that's the hugeness, is there's that many people with that problem out there that are willing to pay you for it, right? And so doing that work along the way. In terms of traction, I definitely believe that that's a misnomer, and I think a lot of times it's it's not being able to tell that story along the lines of like what evidence are you getting along that journey to be able to speak to that credible component, right? A lot of times you get the charismatic leader who can tell a great story, but you're like, wait, let me ask you a question on this. And it's like, oh, have you talked to anyone that's that customer? It's like, no, I just sent out a survey and that was all the information that I got. Versus like, no, I've talked to these people. This is the pattern that I'm starting to see in terms of what the evidence is showing, the language that they're using around that problem set, right? And that is ultimately starting that chain, right? And the more you start to understand elements of your business model, that builds on that foundation for saying the next riskiest component to my business model is X. Well, now let's go systematically test that so I can be able to better understand that. And I think entrepreneurs don't always look at, they think about like, I launched a landing page, that's traction. Well, it's like, well, did anyone come to the landing page? What language did you have on it? Right? Those types of things. And I was actually talking to an entrepreneur earlier today, and part of that is like those feel like wins, right? They feel like, oh, I made something tangible. But when you look at it, it was like, did you really make any progress to understanding any of the unknowns that you didn't have? It was like, no, I didn't, right? And a lot of times we'll talk about it's really procrastinating on doing the work that's key to your startup and your business, right? It was like going and having those tough conversations to see if like, does this even need to exist in the world? Does anyone have this problem, right? But really what that partly is it's unprocessed fear, right? It was like, I have this thing in my head that I feel like can have a lot of value. And if I put it out into the world and get feedback and says, no, this is a stupid idea, like I can empathize that, like that's going to hurt, right? Like if no one wants the thing that you think is going to create value for them, like that's not an easy thing to do. But you don't want to spend time, energy, and resources in pursuing things that don't actually allow you to get to that answer, right? One way or another, whether that's 1 month from now or 10 years from now, and you're still working on the thing, right? You're going to get that answer if there's actually the need. And so I think that starting to put that into mindset of hopefully we can illuminate kind of some of that misnomer around traction and what that actually means, because it's going to get you the information you need to move your startup in the right direction.
I like the the example of the landing page. Like, I launched a landing page. I've got, it's got traction, right? It reminds me. I was at the like a beauty supply store with my wife, just like yesterday, and they she was looking at like eye creams, right? And on the box, when she was like comparing a couple of them, on the box for one of them, it said ophthalmologist tested. And of course, the first thing that came to mind for me is like, okay, but what was the test and what did the test show? Because all you told me was that somebody did a test somewhere. You haven't told me what, like, it could have burned out their retinas and you could still put ophthalmologist tested as long as they're the one who did the test. Um, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like you put a landing page out there, and so what? Like, what was the test? The landing page is not a test;
Right.
it's an asset, right? What was the test, and what did the test show? So we come right back to that, because you mentioned a lot in there, Cameron, and I agree with just all of it. And there's this concept that I won't get into here for time, but it's called innovation accounting, right? And the idea is that when you're looking at traditional means of measurement and metrics for a business, you're going to look at sales, you're going to look at market share, might look at customer lifetime value, cost per sale, whatever. There's going to be a whole set of metrics that you're going to look at. And when you're first starting out in a startup, and I don't just mean like when you have an idea, although it's certainly true then, but even when you get into seed stage, where you're also getting investment, those numbers are all functionally zero. They're not literally zero, but they're functionally zero. They're not important things to measure yet because they're just not big enough to be interesting. And so they become the wrong things to measure. So like, okay, so what can we measure now? Like, so we need a new way of doing accounting for startups that we call innovation accounting. And basically you think about it like a chain. If at the end of the chain is that those big metrics, they say lifetime value or market share, whatever, but the end of the chain is that, and you were to like reverse engineer measurement 1, back, or measurement 10, measurement 9, measurement 8, measurement 7, like what is the thing that you could measure right now that if you're right about it means you're on the wrong track, and if you're wrong about it, right, then you're never going to get there anyway, right? So you can, like, what is it that you can measure right now? It's that chain of evidence, which we can also call evidence of buying behavior, right? What can we get customers to do along the way? So, and that's traction. Traction is how much confirmatory data you have in support of your market hypothesis. So going back to like the landing page is an asset. And so people will say, oh, I want to figure out if people like it, so I'm going to throw a landing page offer. My first question is always the same. It's how are you going to get customers to go to the landing page? I think we skipped a step, which is you can only get them to there if you have an audience, which you can either buy with an ad, and that's not necessarily wrong, which you can buy with an ad or you can acquire organically by building a social following or whatever. But the experiment is then, okay, I have a pool of people. I'm going to get said pool of people to this landing page, and then I'm expecting X% to actually click it. And if they do, that's traction. That's great. That's awesome. But if you don't have the people to get to the landing page, or you don't get that conversion on the landing page, you didn't get traction. You just had an asset, right? You just had installation art on the internet, and the internet is full of installation art, right? So traction is that confirmatory data. It's actual acquisition of knowledge, right? Of validated learning that you get back from the market.
Love it. Well, and one of the things I know, maybe I'll speak for both of us, but if you add on as well, the reason I think part of bringing up these misnomers and helping you really tackle some of these uncertainties and really pushing that edge of what traction means, not to put a landing page, is because we genuinely care for you and want you to succeed in your business, because we know that if you're just out there building landing pages and investing your own resources, time, and energy, you're not making progress to bringing that thing to fruition, versus really switching that mindset to say, how can I build that chain of evidence of buying behavior, right? And understand if I'm actually on that right path, that you're actually going to be bringing that thing more tangibly into the world than creating a landing page or creating an email, whatever that might be. I think that those are great assets, but right, it's about how are you going to use that to test ultimately that buying behavior or that evidence that goes into all of those components of the business model. So it is out of love. I know JDM can be tougher at times than certainly I can be, but overall it is genuinely
I love You just
Go
brought
ahead.
in the what you teased at the top, which was like that I'm gonna shred people down and you're gonna build them back up again. That I'm just like, y'all are doing shit work with your landing pages. All y'all suck. What are you doing out there? And Cameron's like, oh, we're talking out of love, baby. We're doing this out of love.
We have
I mean, you're not wrong,
different love
but you know.
languages, JD, and we have different love languages that will say that nonetheless. But no, it all is the same means to the same end in terms of, it. You need to be breaking it down in that way and really thinking differently about the way you're building your startup, and that it is a mindset shift, right? And I'm not going to lie, creating a landing page and an asset, that feels good, right? Like, it's like, yes, I accomplished something, but when you ask yourself that hard question, did I actually make any progress to knowing some of these things that are core to my business and succeeding? You haven't, right? But you do now have that asset. So now what are you going to do to test that next level of assumptions to ultimately demonstrate that? And so I want to transition us kind of to our third segment here. And we've been throwing out a lot of jargon and language around startups, business models, all those types of things. And we're going to be doing that throughout the Zero to Traction podcast. And but we wanted to kind of just like have a conversation around some of the core ones that you're going to hear episode after episode, that we believe are really valuable. And so we just wanted to make sure we created some space. If you wanted to learn more about any of these tools, definitely go check out the show notes. That's a great place to go check out and learn more. So we'll be putting those in there. But to kick us off, maybe I'll pass it to you, JDM, on the kind of like this context of business model and maybe a tool called the business model canvas, which I know we'll refer to on occasion. And how does that tie to some of the things we've already been talking about and maybe future topics that we'll be chatting about?
Yeah, I love this because and again, check out the show notes. We're gonna have a list of some popular tools, that further resources that you can check out, like Cameron mentioned. But there's so many tools out there, so many tools. Like we're gonna be talking about tools when they're appropriate. But the going back to like my pet peeve from earlier is this tools for tools sake, right? That this is the order you do things, and you always need to do these. Like every startup needs to do a business model canvas, and I actually disagree with that. I think that's wrong advice, because most of the time when you're just starting out, you don't have enough information to fill out a business model canvas. Why? Because a business model canvas documents in these 9 boxes everything you need to know about your business, or everything you want to know about your business, or everything you think you know about your business. It covers the things that are outside your company, things like who the customer is and how you're talking to them and the relationships you're establishing with them, how you're charging them money. It covers things inside the company, everything from your key resources and activities to how much you're charging to your partners, and all that's glued together, like the internal and exterior are glued together by the value proposition. And that's a lot of stuff. That was 9 things I just mentioned, and it is everything having to do with your business. And the tool is a really valuable way to get some of that written down. And if you're a startup on the rise, you get a little traction, you kind of move along. It's a great way to document hypotheses, and then you can start pointing at which ones have evidence and which ones don't. And you say, okay, well, this one's actually really important and foundational. I don't have a lot of evidence for it, so maybe this is the thing that I want to focus on, right? So it can create focus, and that's amazing. And then you go and do the experiment, you get data back, and you modify the business model canvas. Oh, I was wrong about this, which also means I'm going to need to charge a different number, right? Or whatever it is. And then you can watch that story unfold over time. That's the right way to use a tool like that. It can help you in your journey of finding traction, by creating focus, by exposing uncertainty, right? Exposing where that risk is. But if you just do this as an exercise, a checkbox to-do list exercise where, oh, I've done a business model canvas, check, right? Then you're really just wasting your time. You're not doing anything of value, right? Which is why I say it's not always the right approach for really early stage startups anyway. I think that
Totally.
there are simpler ways to get started, right? But anyway, but it's this tool that, if used correctly, if used at the right moment, is really powerful. And so I'd love, for people to get out of the show, if at some point we're like, what's really great for this is this tool, and here's how you go use it. And not saying here are the 5 tools you have to learn, right, to be a startup guy. You're a startup guy if you know spreadsheets and you know these 5 tools.
Right. Yeah. And I think just the only thing I would add in there is, in terms of the business model canvas, and I agree with everything that JDM that you shared, was I think for me, it's a really great visual to see the connectivity of those assumptions, right? Like it shows that chain of lack of evidence, at least when you do your first model, right? You like, okay, I think I'm targeting this person. Well, okay, well, like, okay, now I see the channels that I might have to reach and all of the assumptions that build on that one. So it's like, okay, now I need to go test my most riskiest one, which is, am I targeting the right person, right? At least when you're starting out that business, right? And so for me, it's that great visual to show that connectivity as you get done. And so maybe I'll dive in deeper to one of those elements. You know, for me is really in terms of customers, we'll talk about customer discovery or getting out of the building and going and doing the work, right? That's like going out and actually talking to the people that you have identified have the problem that you're potentially trying to solve, right? And so that element of customer discovery, there's a lot baked into it, but it's really trying to understand their needs on a variety of different levels. And those will allow you to understand where those assumptions lie, but also the language that they use around that problem set that you've identified. And so taking on kind of that mentality of getting out of the building and kind of doing some of this work. There's a higher level thing, design thinking, when we're looking at it around a business model concept. There's kind of these three elements: the desirability of your business, the feasibility, and the viability. And what that really looks like is, do people really want what you're trying to build, right? Is that, how unknown is the desirability component, right? And that's the most risky part for a lot of you starting in your startup, right? Was like, do people care about what you're trying to build as you're getting going, right? And then the next is, well, I've identified a need, I've done the customer discovery, I've tested those assumptions. Well, is it feasible for me to build, right? That's the next set of assumptions in that design thinking layer. And then the last, is it viable, right? So actually when they're solving those, when you've created that way to create value, whatever that might be, can you actually sustain it in terms of that business model, right? And we want to start to take on those types of thinking. So we'll talk about those frameworks of, hey, you need to get into some of that desirability testing in terms of how you're looking at your assumptions and ultimately testing those. And for me, that's ultimately a really key way to start looking at it. I don't know if you want to chat JDM of kind of like looking at, we did talk about investment earlier. Do you want to add some context into investment or any of the tools like a pitch deck and some of those types of things?
Yeah, I think the quickest thing I'll say about that is, like the pitch deck is a tool, just like the business model canvas. It has a purpose, and therefore it has a defined structure about what works and what works poorly, what works well. And there are different facets and aspects to that are also dependent on the stage of your company. A really early stage startup pitch is very different than a Series C startup pitch, right? So it's a tool that you use in order to communicate the information that investors are expecting to know at the surface in order to do that. Granted, like little side point here, the point of a pitch deck is not to get investment. And that's where that's wrong. The purpose of a pitch deck is to get a second conversation. It's not to get the yes, it's to get the second conversation, right? And so they're a tool that you use like anything else. And so I think, again, like to connect all this back together, check the show notes for the most common sets of startup tools. Will keep that list updated over time with just some common tools you can click to get access to those. But unfortunately, I think that's just about all the time we have for today's show. But before we go, we thought we would end each episode with some frivolous in
Frivolous thoughts, my friend.
In our pre-podcast meeting, we changed this from frivolity to frivolous thoughts at Cameron's request. And since then, I haven't been able to say frivolous thoughts all together in one. So let's end with some frivolous thoughts. So Cameron, what is your frivolous for you to share today?
My frivolous thought for us is just the role ChatGPT is playing in it's just been top of mind for me the last few weeks. And I really started to lean into the tool to start to optimize some of these blank slates that I have, often am doing LinkedIn posts and those types of things. And so for me, it's helped automate some of that process for me and help me kind of get the blank slate filled a little more quickly. But I am looking at other ways to start to plug that into my daily routine and start to add value to some of my work. And I think it's certainly a tool for startups and, expediting some of that process, right? And so, I imagine we'll have some conversations of how, ChatGPT can play a role in helping you build scripts for things or whatever that might be. But it is definitely a tool that I would check out if you haven't already started to explore and play with it. But what is your frivolous thought for the day, JDM?
I I love the Chat GPT thing. I wish that was my frivolous thought. I think we should do a whole episode on how founders
We
can
should.
use
Let's
Chat
do it.
GPT to great effect, or even all of the open AI tools a little bit more broadly, because like Dolly and everything is also pretty cool. But yeah, so my frivolous thought is truly frivolous here. So I had just yesterday I watched the first episode of season 3 of Star Trek Picard. And this has nothing to do with startups whatsoever, but it is stuck in my craw. It is something that I can't stop thinking about. And not because it was great, but because I'm so undecided about it. I grew up on The Next Generation. I grew up on Patrick Stewart and Picard, and that whole crew. Obviously, Picard's a better captain than Kirk. And any of you listeners out there think different, you can feel free to at me on social media, and I will tell you why you're wrong. But it's one of those. It's a show that I know from my childhood, and almost always when something gets rebooted or continued, it's terrible. It's just awful, right? And so this time they're bringing back the whole original crew and trying to lace that together in an interesting way. And I left the first episode wondering, could this possibly be good? It wasn't bad, right? It wasn't bad. It just was, there's just not enough data points. They don't have enough traction with me
Mm,
yet, right?
that's what I was
For
thinking.
I don't have enough confirmatory data to know. But Cameron, is it true you've never seen Star Trek?
I've never seen Star Trek. I know it's
You've never seen
disappointing
Star
when
Trek. Okay.
we look at these frivolous thoughts here. I have not seen any of the Star Treks. So
I am going to, okay, so I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a little YouTube video. It's a clip from a show called Extras with Ricky Gervais. Patrick Stewart played himself, and it's what happens when he learns that Ricky Gervais had never seen Star Trek. All right, so your homework is to watch that. I'm going to put
sounds
that in the
good.
show notes for the listeners. But stay tuned for upcoming episodes. Our first 5 episodes of this podcast are entirely a startup crash course. So we just did the 30,000 foot view. What are startups? What are traction? Common tools. Really 30,000 foot view. But next episode, we are diving into customers. We're going to go real deep into the concept of customers. We're going to have a special guest who's an expert in customers and customer discovery. So that's going to be really awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. But for now, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to give us a follow or a subscribe in Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you might be listening to this. You can also subscribe to the show for free on Substack so that you can stay in the loop on all things startups and traction. Just go over to zerototraction.show. And if you found this helpful or even, dare I say, interesting, do us a favor and leave a 5-star review or share it with a friend. You know, my friends, we must appease the algorithm. We are slaves to it, and a review would really help us out. But that's it. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Until then, goodbye.
Bye bye. See you later.